about to tell you happened to me when I was about 13 years old. This story changed my family forever. So, when I was 13, I was taken away from my biological mother and placed into foster care for about a month before my aunt and her husband decided to step in and take guardianship of me. My aunt was my mom's older sister, and I would see her mostly on holidays because her and her family lived in another state. I remember going to live with my aunt and her family. It was different than living with my mom, who was a single mom with only one child. Living with my mom didn't have much structure. My mom had a substance abuse problem, so she paid very little attention to me and what I was doing. I would usually watch TV alone until I fell asleep. I don't remember ever having a bedtime. There were times she forgot to go grocery shopping and she would tell me I could eat ice cream for breakfast. Sometimes I wished my mom paid more attention to me, but I can't say I wasn't happy about being allowed to stay up late and eat a dessert for breakfast. Living with my aunt and her family was different. She and her family had more structure in their home. They had 3 children, 2 boys who were 16 and 18 and a girl who was also 13 like me. We all sat at the dining table and had dinner together every night. All of the children had bedtimes and certainly there was no eating ice cream for breakfast. It took me a while to adjust to my new life, but I eventually did. There was only one person in the home that didn't fit into the family. It was my 18-year-old cousin, who we will call Nathan. Nathan was a bit rebellious and didn't like being told what to do by his parents or by anyone for that matter. He decided not to go to college, which disappointed my aunt and uncle, who were both college graduates. Instead, Nathan had decided to work odd jobs until he figured out what he wanted to do long term. I remember him working a few jobs at a few fast food restaurants, but never being able to keep them for long. I would hear his parents yelling at him a few times and even threatening to kick him out. Soon, it was obvious that Nathan was on something. He was starting to remind me of the way my mom looked when she was high. His use of whatever substance he was on must have been the final straw for my aunt and uncle, because they kicked him out of the house. I remember the night that they kicked him out. My uncle and him got into a physical altercation and my aunt was crying for them to stop. Nathan left the house that night and we didn't hear from him again for a long time. His presence when he lived in the house was like a dark cloud, and I'll admit, things were much quieter with him gone, but I still missed him, nonetheless. One night, all of the children were sleeping upstairs when we heard commotion coming from the living room downstairs. We heard my uncle shouting for someone to get out. We could hear another voice in the distance, but couldn't make out the words. Suddenly, there were 3 pops, which at the time we didn't know were gunshots. After the pops, we saw my aunt running down the stairs, followed by a loud scream. My other 2 cousins and I rushed downstairs after we heard her scream. What we saw was truly terrifying. We saw my uncle lying on the floor with my aunt kneeling next to him and crying hysterically. She was yelling for us to call the police, and that is just what we did. I stared at my uncle as he took his last breath, and before he passed away, he uttered his last words. He said, Nathan did this to me." I couldn't believe my ears. My uncle had just told us all that his own son was the reason why he was shot on the floor of our living room. When the police finally showed up, they removed all of us from the house and began taping off the crime scene with yellow tape. My aunt looked numb. She sat on the curb with her head in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. A few of the neighbors were outside trying to calm me and my cousins down. The police wanted us to come to the police station and give statements. When we arrived at the police station, we were separated. I sat in a room alone for a few minutes until a woman came. She introduced herself as an advocate from Child Protective Services. She told me that everything was okay and that I wasn't in any trouble. She offered me cookies and milk. She said that the police wanted to ask me some questions and that she would be there the entire time to support me. She was very nice to me and she made me feel comfortable. When the detectives came into the room, they asked me a bunch of questions about what I saw and what I heard. I told them everything I remembered, including the fact that my uncle had said that Nathan was the one who had shot him. I was at the police station for what felt like hours before I was reunited with my aunt and cousins. When we left the police station, we stayed at my grandma's house. When she heard about what happened, she was devastated also. I remember staying at her house for a few months until we were able to go back to my aunt's house. It was weird at first, going back for the first time to the place where the tragedy happened. The carpet in the living room was still stained, but it looked like someone had tried to clean up the mess that was there. The next day, a company came and removed the carpet from the living room. My aunt had also purchased new furniture and everything for that room. We didn't stay in the house long before the house went on the market, and we moved to a new house. My aunt was never the same. She was very withdrawn and rarely ever smiled. My cousins also looked sad and withdrawn. Everyone in the house had undergone therapy, which seemed to help a little bit, although it took time. As for Nathan, his story ended in tragedy as well. After he took his father's life, he went on the run and was hiding out in motels. Once the police caught up to him in a motel, he decided to turn the gun on himself before he could be brought in on charges for what he did. That was another tragedy that my family had to suffer through yet again. This story happened to a family in the same neighborhood that I grew up in. The family consisted of a husband and wife and their son, who we will call Kenny. Kenny went to same school as me and we were in the same grade. He was a good kid for the most part and kind of stayed to himself. He was the only child for his parents, who were also quiet and stayed to themselves. After graduation, Kenny went away to the military and was gone for a few years before he ever returned. By the time he came back, I had graduated from college and was doing an internship at a big company nearby. I noticed that Kenny was a little quieter than he was before he went into the service. His physical appearance was even different. He was more muscular and now he had a shaved head. He looked meaner and didn't even say hello. In high school, he always said hello. A few of the other neighbors said that noticed the change in him, and some people even called his behavior bizarre and creepy. Not wanting to judge, I just assumed he had seen some traumatizing things during his deployment and tried to be sympathetic to that. One of the women in the neighborhood who was friendly with Kenny's mom said that his mom told her that Kenny was heavily medicated because he had developed PTSD during his deployment. She even admitted that without his medication, Kenny would behave in an erratic way that sometimes scared her and her husband. So, one early morning at about 3 o'clock, while most of the neighborhood was asleep, we heard a loud bang. I jumped out of bed and looked through my blinds to see what was happening. I didn't see anything. I left my bedroom and was met by my parents and sister in the hallway. They had heard the same thing and wondered what was happening. My parents were certain that it was gunshots that we heard, and my sister and I were unsure. A few minutes after the bang, we heard sirens approaching our street. When we looked outside, we saw that the police were pulling up to Kenny's house. We were all wondering what happened. We didn't find out the details of what happened until a few days later. We found out that Kenny had gone out for a stroll in the freezing cold, or perhaps sleepwalking or something. Either way, he was dressed in all black, including a ski mask, and when he returned home, his father thought he was an intruder. Without hesitation, Kenny's father shot him and took his son's life on accident. When we learned the details, everyone in the neighborhood felt bad for the family and we offered our condolences. We barely saw the parents after that day. Kenny's mom moved out and the parents divorced less than 6 months later. This story happened to my best friend about 10 years ago, and in case you're wondering, I got permission from her to tell her story. My best friend was like the sister I never had. I was the only girl in my family with 6 brothers. However, she had an older sister who she just couldn't get along with. Let's call my best friend Chloe and her sister Tara. Chloe was very kind-hearted and genuinely cared about others. She was sort of an introvert. Her sister Tara was the exact opposite though. She was an extrovert who liked to party. She was popular in high school and sort of a mean girl to people she felt were beneath her. Whenever I went to Chloe's house, I always got a weird vibe from Tara, who would always make rude comments about our appearance or how stupid we were. I should mention that Chloe and Tara's dad had passed away when we were in elementary school, so the only parent they had left was their mom, who was very nice, quite like Chloe. I should mention that Chloe and Tara were twins, which makes this story even more messed up. Sadly, the twins' mother passed away our junior year of high school. Her death was very sudden and very hard on Chloe. Chloe had hoped that the death of her mom would bring her and her sister closer, but it did the opposite. It pushed them even further apart. After their mother passed away, the twins went to live with their uncle and his family. When they turned 18, their mother's lawyer had contacted them about their mother's will. I remember the day like it was yesterday. Chloe had called me on the phone and told me about the will and asked if I could drive her to the lawyer's office. At the time, she didn't have a car, so of course I agreed. When we pulled into the parking lot, I remember Tara already being there and walking up to the door of the building at the same time as Chloe. The girls barely spoke and greeted each other in a cold way. When Chloe returned to my car an hour after I dropped her off, she told me that her mom had left an equal amount of money to bother her and her sister, and there was a college fund established for them both as well as physical property. I was happy for Chloe. I knew that she would put the money to good use. After the reading of the will, Chloe and her sister didn't really communicate much. By that time, they had both moved out of their uncle's house and had gone their separate ways. They went to college and graduated, and Chloe was able to purchase her own home in a very nice neighborhood. She had a great job and had applying to law school. I was super proud of her. Tara, on the other hand, hadn't bought a house and instead chose to rent and spend her money on material items and a boyfriend who didn't work. Once Tara's money ran out, she would always call Chloe for loans which she would never repay. One day while Chloe was sitting at home, she got a strange knock at the door. When she went to open the door, she was greeted by 2 FBI agents. The agents told her that there had been a hit out on her and she needed to come with them immediately. That day, she found out that Tara had tried to set her up to be harmed. I guess that was the easiest way to acquire Chloe's wealth. When she found out that her own twin had conspired to do something like that, Chloe was devastated. Tara ended up being convicted and has been sitting in prison for almost 10 years. Make sure to like and subscribe for more stories. Remember, stay spooked.